All right, that puts us at time. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the STM Association Integrity Hub launch webinar. It's great to have so many people here. My name is Chris Graff. I lead research integrity work at Springer Nature. I'm also a member of the World Conference on Research Integrity Program Committee. You should all come to Cape Town next month for the meeting. I'll be there. And I'm also the chair of the governance board for the STM Integrity Hub, which is why we're all here, to launch the new STM Integrity Hub and to talk about why integrity is something that's best done together. A bit like coffee and cake. Does that work for you? If you can think of other things that go really well together, let's do some engagement in the chat. Put your other things that go together like coffee and cake into the chat. And while you're doing that, let me walk through the agenda for you. So the hub, when it's up and running, will target bogus and unreliable research, including that comes from so-called emails. And our first speaker today is Nicola Nugent from the Royal Society of Chemistry, who will share her insights from the RSC's work into why paper mills are a problem that we all need to know about. And for those of us who've been looking into these things, simultaneous duplicate submissions are an indicator of paper milled articles, and they're a calling card from a paper mill, really. So Katrina from Elsevier will tell us then about Elsevier's duplicate submissions check pilot. So we'll hear from Katrina second. Of course, solving these problems without making publishing harder or less trust-based for the vast majority of legitimate researchers is going to take some smart thinking. That's where Adam Day comes in. Adam from SAGE is going to give us an overview of SAGE's innovative research integrity initiatives. Each of those presentations will be quite short, 5 minutes each, I think. And we'll break for a bit of Q&A from the audience to the panelists, the speakers. And then we'll get into thinking about new technical solutions. So of course, to get new technical solutions to work, we need access to the right kinds of data in large amounts. If we're training an AI, we need large amounts of training data. And some publishers have very little data about integrity problems with which they can design their technical solutions. And this is the reason for the Integrity Hub. The hub will enable publishers to both share and to get access to the scale and volumes of data that we'll all need for effective solutions, and indeed probably to get access to the solutions themselves. So after the Q&A, Joris van Rossum from the STM Association and hughkakus, also from the STM Association, will give us a demonstration of the prototype Integrity Hub, showing two particular use cases, and that will be fascinating. They'll show us how some things are done better together, like what have we got here? Apple pie and cheese from the north, bananas and custard, strawberries and rhubarb and custard, gin and tonic. Yes, cheese and wine, anybody? Anyway, why Joris and Hilke will show us how some things are better done together, like working collaboratively on research integrity. And after they've demoed the Integrity Hub, Joris will chair a panel of all the people who've spoken, including me, where we can talk about the issues, where you can ask more questions, and that's how we'll finish the day. So, welcome to you all to the launch of the Integrity Hub. It's great that so many people are here. We hope to convince you that integrity is indeed something like coffee and cake, or peanut butter and jelly, or corn chips and red wine, who knew, or beer and vice versa, that integrity is something that's better done together, and that you'll all join in the collaboration with your respective organizations. And so with that very brief introduction, I'll ask our first speaker to prepare herself. Nicola, are you with us and are you ready?
I am, yes. I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay, please do. And thank you, and over to you.
Okay, so hopefully you can see my slide correctly. Yep, so great, thank you. So yeah, thanks for that introduction, Chris. My name's Nicola Nugent. I'm Publishing Manager, Quality and Ethics at Royal Society of Chemistry. And I'm just going to give you a very brief run through of our experience at the Royal Society of Chemistry of investigating suspected paper mill articles. So advance my slide. Apologies. So yeah, just by way of a very brief introduction to paper mills, these are, as many of you will already know, these are essentially organizations peddling fake research papers to anyone who'll pay, essentially. And this is some coverage of this issue in Science magazine and the Wall Street Journal. So these companies on the face of it may appear to be offering editing or translation services, but essentially they can produce fake articles to order, really. So an author can request a paper of a certain kind, the company will produce the figures, the data, and write the fake paper. And then authorship is sold so that researchers pay to have their name included on an article that they certainly didn't work on and may indeed be entirely fabricated. So our story, back in January of 2021, we announced the retraction of 70 articles that we believed were from paper mills. And so I'm going to tell you about how we detected those and investigated the articles, and then also a bit about the measures we have put in place to prevent further paper mill articles being published. And these are just snippets of the coverage of our announcement of our retraction of 70 papers. This is coverage from Chemical and Engineering News, Chemistry World, and Retraction Watch. And I just wanted to note that the coverage actually for us was relatively positive in terms of positive feedback about us tackling this issue and being open about what had happened in our journals and what we were doing to fix it. So in terms of detection, how did we know we had this problem? Well, we use ScholarOne as our manuscript submission system, and one of the features of that system is a tool called the Unusual Activity Detector. And we received some alerts through that tool that related to unusual IP address activity across completely unrelated user accounts. And at the same time, as we were receiving those alerts, an editor on one of our journals also noticed some striking and unusual similarities between, again, otherwise completely unrelated papers. So this was similarities in things like the structure of the paper, the formatting of the figures, and yeah, in between papers that otherwise appeared to be completely unrelated. And then at the same time, we were becoming aware of this issue of paper mills generally, and the patterns of submission to our journal that seemed to chime with some of the characteristics being highlighted by those people such as Elizabeth Bick and others who were starting to bring this issue to light. And I've got a link there to Elizabeth Bick's blog post on the so-called tadpole paper mill, which is well worth a read if you haven't seen it. And so we came up with our sort of a checklist of paper mill indicators, which included things like looking at the different types of data or the absence of raw data or supplementary information, any signs of image manipulation is an obvious one, looking at affiliation and contact information, and also this idea of the formulaic title, which is Elizabeth Bick highlights in that blog post, is a pretty strong indicator of a potential paper mill. And so we knew we had some of these suspicious papers within going through our peer review process, but at the time we also wanted to be proactive about checking and identifying whether any papers we had actually published could be from paper mills. And so we started out by asking Scholar One to provide us with a list of all the papers that we had accepted that had triggered that particular flag in their unusual activity detector. And we set about triaging those. So we reviewed all of them against our checklist and ruled out any that didn't meet the criteria, didn't have the characteristics of paper mill. And then we went into the sort of evidence gathering phase of our investigation, which was extremely time consuming and resource intensive. It involved things like contacting the authors, asking them for raw data, asking them to respond to particular concerns for individual papers, but also working with scientific and image integrity experts and using available sort of tools and software to help us gather evidence as well. And then once we gathered all of that evidence, we needed to decide what action we would take on each individual paper. And that resulted in the retraction of those 70 articles that I mentioned at the beginning. So that's a very, very swift run through of what we did and how we ended up at retractions. I think it's also important to cover the fact that we put in place preventative measures since then to make sure that, not only have we gone about sort of trying to correct the literature and retract the ones that we've published, but also to try and make sure that we catch these submissions at the earliest possible stage and make sure that they don't get published. So this slide's just very brief summary of the kinds of things we've implemented since then. So we now have additional screening checks at submission, which are fairly manual admin checks. We've strengthened the requirements for our authors on some specific types of data, for example, Western blots. And in terms of editors and staff, we've tried to increase, or we have significantly increased awareness amongst our editorial and admin staff to make sure that they're well equipped to spot the characteristics of paper mills, and for our editors as well, providing them with training and awareness raising so that they can spot these and know what to do when they see the signs and know how to react. We've also had some of our team in our publication ethics team and in our journals team have received training in using software such as Photoshop to detect image manipulation. And finally, we've also carried out a pilot of specific software for detecting image manipulation. We're actually in the process of rolling that out across our journals. So to finish my sort of 5-minute slot, I just want to really echo Chris's comments at the beginning about collaboration and the need for collaboration. We from the outset, we've been keen to work with others and share our learning with other publishers, and we've been doing that through conversations with individual publishers or in groups. We've also been, through my colleague Anna Pendlebury, participating in a COPE working group on paper mills, and of course we're participating in this STM hub for research integrity collaboration. And just want to emphasize that the issue of paper mills in particular is a challenge across the publishing industry and the scientific community as a whole, and so really requires a joined up response from all of us. So just to finish very quickly, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues Anna Pendlebury and Laura Fisher. Anna's our publishing ethics specialist, and Laura is one of our executive editors who did a lot of the hard work in terms of the actual investigation and carrying out the retractions and indeed in helping pull together these slides. Some of you may have seen either myself, Anna, or Laura present one or two of these slides before. And that's it. So thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicola. That's a really good overview of paper mills as a problem and what you've done about it at the RSC. And now we'll hand over to Katrina from Elsevier to talk about duplicate submissions pilot. Over to you, Katrina.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Sorry, I'm still on mute. Let's just get this moving. I'm going to assume people can see my slides, but if you can't, someone please.
Yep, they're all good. They're all good.
Literally shouting is totally fine. So the challenge of this is the time on it. So I'll try and so I have to do very brief overview. That means also I'm not a technical person. I work in journals, in ethics investigations, in policies, and also in training materials for editors and how to use software related to ethics. But I'm not a data scientist, I'm not a product manager, I'm not a technical person. So I'm relying on Adam. If I say something really wrong on the data science side, he'll correct it later. But so I won't go into that side in too much detail. But just to give a bit of context, this is not because just to get across the sort of scale that Elsevier's at in terms of numbers of journals, all different subject areas, but also that a lot of our journals are not owned by Elsevier, they're owned by societies. So that adds certain complexity with these kind of issues sometimes. But also the sheer number of editors that we're trying to work with, which we're working with in terms of when you're rolling out any kind of ethics software, the number of editors who we need to get messages across to, we need to inform and educate on how to use the software in a proper way. Most of our editors, I don't know the percentage, but probably over 90%, are external editors, meaning they're full-time academics or clinicians, they're not Elsevier employees. So there's also that little bit, maybe additional distance in terms of training and so on. Also internally, a lot of internal staff who also you have to try and make sure that their knowledge is kept up on these things. So first, just to start with duplication, why do we care about duplication? And I probably shouldn't even call it duplication, maybe redundant or simultaneous publication is better, because sometimes something isn't just published twice, it's published multiple times, or more than twice. So just to mention a distinction here a little bit between simultaneous submission, or papers being submitted, the same paper by the same authors being submitted to other journals at the same time, and duplicate publication, the paper actually getting published more than twice. And this is one of the things we have learned from the analysis our data scientists have been doing, that they are very closely related, but slightly distinctive problems, in the sense that we can see from the data that most authors are not trying to publish their paper twice. Most duplicate submissions we get, the author withdraws one of the versions. What they're trying to do is basically get through the process faster. Whereas one of our technical people said to me, this doesn't sound like an ethical problem, it sounds more like an efficiency problem. He couldn't really understand why you couldn't submit your paper to more than one journal at the same time. He didn't really see what the problem with that was. If you have enough resources, why not have multiple journals check the paper? So we do see that there's a difference between duplicate submission and duplicate publication. I'm going to focus more on duplicate publication, because that for me is more of the real ethical issue and what that means. And the first thing it means is just fairness. It's not a level playing field. You know, if people are applying for jobs and one person's CV is padded with what looks like 5 studies, but is actually just 1 study, and the other person CV is only real papers with unique research in them, it's just not fair, right? Also the same for H indexes, Scopus profiles, ORCID profiles, whatever other way people try to show their productivity, it's not fair, right? That's the one basic thing. The other issue, which is potentially as serious or more serious probably, is it can it can disrupt the literature, in the sense of if someone is doing a meta-analysis and effectively the same study has been published more than once, there is a risk it will be double counted, and that will affect the meta-analysis, which could even affect, you know, in extreme cases could affect like guidelines for clinical care even. And then the other things, as my colleague said, is efficiency. It's a waste of editors and reviewers' time, which we know is increasingly difficult to find. And then possibly most seriously, or maybe one of the reasons we're most motivated to really improve our detection of duplicates, is that if we define a duplicate as, you know, the same paper, usually you would say the same paper by the same authors. However, we also see papers where we get the same paper, but from different authors, totally unrelated authors, different countries or totally different parts of the country, identical paper submitted around the same time, which we tend to think, can't always prove, but we tend to think is a sign of a paper mill. So it's also very interesting from the paper mill side. Obviously, and this is interesting for people who most people already have similar sort of functionality or similar sort of tools already. And that's really good to know in terms of using experience that we've had in the past from other tools and applying them in this case. And for example, Similarity Check, but Similarity Check is only checking against published literature. EM also has a duplicate check, has had a duplicate check for years already, but that's checking within the same journal. So what we're adding to that kind of suite of tools is a tool that's looking in between different Elsevier journals across the 2,700 journals. many of the lessons we have learned from using these other tools are very relevant here, and I'll come to that in a second. This is very basic, especially nowadays with COVID tests. Everybody knows about false positives, false negatives. You don't really need to be told this, but it's good to bear in mind. I'm more talking about how this applies to the editors actually using the tool in the end, that you're always having to find a balance with every tool between precision and recall, of on the one hand not wanting to miss cases, on the other hand not wanting to have too many false positives. And if you have false positives, and to make it like very real of what it means, if there are false positives in the tool, there is always a risk that editors are going to make false accusations. People are going to get accused of something that they haven't done. And that's what it boils down to. And that is a big concern. And actually, at the moment, at this stage, the relatively early stage of the tool, we're nearly more concerned about that, of the false positives, than we are concerned about the cases we might be missing. Because that can be really offensive for people, obviously, and really inappropriate. So that balance is really important. And one finding that our data scientist, Yuri, came to with the analysis, he started his work, and Adam will probably talk about this in much more detail, from his methodology. But Adam's methodology, he started with just titles, just trying to find duplicates using titles. And what you can see here is the big purple circle is when all the duplicates he found from a sample just based on titles. Then he started adding abstracts. And then when he added abstracts, he found that majority of what looked like duplicates when he only used titles, when he added abstracts to the mix, turned out they were false positives. Most of them were not true duplicates. And also he was missing actual duplicates. Then he went to the last stage, went, okay, actually, this isn't good enough either. We need full text. All of this, of course, like technically is more complex and takes more engineering power and technology. So then let's look at full text. And then what you can see here is the number of cases, like the sheer number of cases you miss. If you don't look at full text, you're missing a huge number of actual cases, but also making false accusations as well. So what does that mean in terms of editors and actually using the tool? So we started rolling out the tool in February this year with 100 journals, which 100 out of 2,700 journals doesn't sound like very much, but we picked the 100 journals that have the most duplicates. So it's a larger representation than it might look from 100 journals. So one of the things to think about with these things, you have to, we don't do anything really big bang, right? Especially something as sensitive as this. Giving an editor a new tool is a very sensitive matter, especially if it's going to result in papers getting rejected, which it almost certainly will. So we think about things very carefully. We're not going to just overnight roll it out with 2,700 journals. I wouldn't normally start much with 100 journals either. I would start smaller. But in this case, you need a kind of a critical mass, of course, because if you have a journal in the pilot and there's a duplicate between the journal in the pilot and another journal that isn't in the pilot, then what are you going to do? You're notifying one of the editors, but not notifying the other editor, which doesn't make sense, right? So you have to sort of have a certain critical mass for it to actually sort of work. There are certain principles that are behind everything we're doing here in terms of from the very early stages of the algorithm, how sensitive you want to make the algorithm, to the rollout, to the email that goes to the editor, to every single word of that email to the editor is thought through. And the reason for that is largely because of the principles around the risk of bias, the risk of the AI creating bias, which boils down to basically that it can be too tempting for an editor to take AI completely on face value, either because they trust it a bit too much or because they're just so busy that it's just so tempting. Editors are getting so many submissions, and especially if it's an ethical question mark, they feel sort of almost like they have the moral authority to reject the paper. So we have to be super careful about the phrasing, the wording, making sure the editors know this is just output from a tool. It's basically dumb. You have to apply your expertise. We need a human check. So the code principles on that and the STM white paper, that's very much underlining this. The other principle is editorial independence. This may vary a little bit per publisher, but we're very strong on the editor makes the decision. They are the expert, they are the decision maker. We are not going to take decision making out of their hands. For example, we're not going to have the tool detect a duplicate and automatically reject the paper. That is not appropriate whatsoever.
Hey, Katrina, can I just ask that you try and bring things to a close so we can give Adam enough time? Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks very much.
And there are some dilemmas that we are still working through that. I think we may always be working through in the same way we also do with Authenticate, questions like making sure you don't have too many false positives. In this case, are you going to reject both submissions or just one submission, depending on maybe also the experience level of the author, whether it could be an innocent mistake. Journals can be competing. Are they going to be comfortable? As a society journal is competing with an Elsevier journal. Are they comfortable with this information being shared? And the image question, that this tool is only looking at text and that the image tools are separate tools. So that then the editor is dealing with multiple tools that are looking at sort of similar related problems, which is not super user-friendly for editors. So there's our learning so far. Thank you for listening. And oh, sorry, quickly mention that.
Oh, go for it. Do you want to mention them by name? You're very welcome. We have enough time.
Nick, Katie, Egbert, and Yuri.
Awesome.
Everyone.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Okay, really great. Brilliant. Good insights there into your duplicate submissions pilot and how useful it was in the lessons. Let's move swiftly on to Adam. Talk about innovative research at Sage. Adam, it's all yours. All right, we can see your slides. That's super duper, but we can't hear you yet, but perhaps you're just being quiet.
Nope, just forgot to unmute myself.
Awesome, off you go. Thanks all.
Okay, thanks very much for having me here. I'll just set the scene briefly. So this sort of roughly shows the rate of publication of new articles every year, according to Crossref DOI registrations. I think there's some useful context here. I put two things to you. The first is that research integrity issues, misconduct, contract cheating, these things are endemic, and they have been for all of this time. What's different now is that we have a lot more people trying to get published. We have a lot more incentives for people to get published, and a lot more kind of different places for them to get published, which might be places where maybe they're finding people who want to cheat the system or finding weaknesses. So I think that the thing is that the bigger this ecosystem gets, the more opportunities there might be for that kind of misconduct, which is why it's such a pressing issue right now. A long time ago, some years ago, we built this rejected article tracker, which you can download for free. It's on our GitHub page. And what this shows is, this graph here is just the number of days between an article being rejected by Sage and being published elsewhere. And this was kind of an interesting result because we noticed that sometimes articles were published elsewhere before we rejected them, which I thought was very strange. And this is quite nice in a way because, this is actually a way to kind of detect duplicate submission, which is a form of misconduct. And it's very easy. It's also very hard to explain. It's kind of like a smoking gun, right? It's easy to detect, hard to explain. Duplicate submission generally not seen as a serious form of misconduct, but as we've discussed, there may be a link there with paper mills. So last year we worked with the STM working group on simultaneous submissions to look into this a bit further. And looking just internally, just at Sage's journals, we find there's this kind of low-level background of duplicate submission, right? This is, I mean, it's like less than 1%, but it's growing. And it's something that we could probably do without because it doesn't do any good. And this is just where an article is submitted to one Sage journal and then another Sage journal at the same time, okay? What would be more interesting would be to see when something is submitted to a Sage journal and also submitted to another publisher. But we didn't share any data when we did this, so we can't see that. But we can get a little bit of an insight to it by looking at our rejected articles. So this is a list of suspects. These are articles that have things in common with paper mills that we've rejected. It's about 9,000 of them. We're not sure that these are all paper mills. So don't read too much into the numbers. And we tried to track them. 6,000 of them haven't been published. There's a small error on the tracking, but this is going to be broadly correct. These aren't the exact numbers, but it's broadly correct. So 2/3 of them haven't been published yet. 1/3 of them had been published. And of them, 2,500 didn't have enough data for us to check whether they're duplicates submitted, but 500 of them did. This is where a publisher actually makes data on their submission dates available via Crossref. And what we found was that 350 of those 500 were duplicate submissions. So they were submitted to Sage at the same time as the publisher that published them. So that, I think, okay, there's a huge amount of uncertainty in all of this data, but I think it seems pretty clear that paper mills are using duplicate submission a lot and probably being quite careful about not sending both papers to the same publisher, send to different publishers instead. So there could be a pretty big opportunity here, right? You know, as I said, duplicate submission is easy to detect and it's hard to explain. So it's potentially a good tool here to detect paper mills. The STM Collaboration Hub are already working on a tool to detect duplicate submissions at the submission stage, so we don't have to do all this analysis, retrospective analysis later on. We actually will catch these things early on, and I think that'll make life very hard for a paper mill, you know, to get multiple submissions underway at the same time will become impossible. Also very hard to work around. You know, I can talk about this in a public forum and I can tell you all about it. I can tell the paper mills all about it, and there's really not a lot they can do. If we can see 2 duplicate articles under consideration at the same time, they can't really work around that. We did another project last year on duplicate peer review. So this is just, all this is a little search. So this is a referee here, this is another referee, and this red line joining them tells me that at some point, these 2 referees submitted exactly identical referee comments. You run this search over, you know, a large number of journals, and you start to find a lot more cases. You know, there's some sort of organized sharing of referee reports, which looks like, you know, someone trying to game the peer review system. This is a paper mill. We know that because we can connect that to more data about those papers, and we know that they were rejected as paper mills. Expand the search a bit more, you find more detail. This paper mill gets a lot bigger, and you can see a lot more going on here and a lot more sort of organized stuff. You can read more about this in our preprint. I wanted to say a little bit about patterns versus evidence. So a lot of this stuff that we're looking at here, it's about analyzing patterns where things look a bit unusual. You know, things that if this was a TV cop show, this would be circumstantial evidence. You know, I think we need to be a bit careful about that because it doesn't prove that someone's done something wrong, but it is easy to find, right? So it helps us to know where to look. Evidence, you know, we have these smoking guns that I've talked about, which are the things which are easy to detect, hard to explain. I think these are well worth going after. You know, these are the things where I think it's the easiest way to say, you know, that something is definitely a paper mill or some other form of misconduct. There are also some harder ways to find evidence, but I think the evidence is really key if you are talking about things like retractions. Rejection, maybe there's more scope to just look at the patterns, but the evidence is very important. Ultimately, though, you're always going to need a human. You're never going to be able to just automate dealing with these cases. So yeah, just in summary, this is an endemic problem. It's getting worse, and it's much worse than it used to be now. Detecting it is hard. However, right now, I think there's some really great opportunities to identify likely paper mill products, as well as other misconduct. Okay, thank you.
Lovely, Adam. That's really great. Thank you so much. And thank you also to Nicola and Katrina. The intention was to pause at this point for a Q&A, but I'd like to ask Joris and Hilke if they'd like to move on now and do the demo, because we well, we've used all the time already that was allocated to Q&A. So Joris and Hilke, what do you think? What's the best thing to do at this point?
I see in the chat somebody says demo please with an exclamation mark. So let's follow that advice.
Let's do that. All right.
Let's make sure there's some time for questions and discussion afterwards.
And I think this is the point I hand the chairing of the meeting over to you, Joris. So there
Yes.
you go. There's the chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you for all the speakers. It was, I think, very clear, first of all, how complex this issue is. A lot of analysis, a lot of work being done already, but also the size of the problem. So we heard Adam say the problems are increasing. So that means that we have to ramp up our efforts, but also, and especially also, of course, after this section, to show you how collaboration could really help us solve these issues. So before we go into the demo, let me say a bit more about the Integrity Hub program. So we aim to equip the publishers and the scholarly community in general with data, intelligence, and technology to protect research integrity. And we really do that on 3 levels. First of all, by sharing knowledge and intelligence. For example, what we've seen earlier in the sessions on paper mills, sharing that information can be very efficient for us to solve these issues. Second, we cannot solve these issues without developing legal frameworks around privacy, about confidentiality, of course, crucial for our industry. Editorial policy development, equally important, and technical interoperability will also really help us. So that is the element of policies and frameworks we tackle in this program. And third, what we're going to show you a bit today is the enabling infrastructure. So how can we make sure it's easier for publishers to access tools that help us in screen manuscripts, to build tools? Another ambition we have is indeed not only to work with third-party tools, but also develop them ourselves. And very important, the pooling of content. Pooling content is important to create a test corpus, but also create content pipelines, for example, in the case of duplicate submissions. So very important, this program is really a collaboration of publishers. So also here, shout out to all the active participants. We have 20 publishers and other organizations like Submission Systems, very actively collaborating, which of course is crucial in its success. So how do the publishers collaborate? Well, our work is organized in several ways. We have so-called working groups, so they tackle specific issues that are prioritized by the publishers. We heard about duplicate submissions being a problem in itself, but also indicative often of paper mills. We have a working group looking at image alteration and duplication, and paper mills, which is a problem which deserves its own working group. So we have started a working group in that topic as well. The Integrity Hub also has a task force looking at tackling and solving specific issues and impediments. For example, the legal aspect is very important, but also looking at cybersecurity. And we have a governance board consisting of senior executives overlooking the strategy of this program. The last slide for me before we actually really go into the demo. Just talk about phasing. So today we will show you an early prototype, Demonstrator. We will move to an MVP in Q1 and 2023. There we will have live content and actual operational screening capabilities launched. Before that, between now and that MVP, we will slowly follow up with more releases. For example, integrating with submission systems, which is going to be very important, but also looking at third-party tools that we integrate into the hub. And just to also, we'll share the link in the chat please follow us for any developments. And now I give the word to Hilke with the actual demo.
Great, thank you very much, Joris. So my name is hughkakus. I'm the Chief Information Officer for STM Solutions and one of the instigators of the hub. And with that background, it's really a privilege and a pleasure today to be able to pull back the curtains a bit and unveil the very first demonstrator version of the technology that we have in mind as we develop the hub. Before showing you the actual screens, I wanted to make sure that I bring across that the hub is really an enabling infrastructure, which means that just by itself, it's not a turnkey solution, but it's really meant to be part of a bigger system in which the role of the hub is to accelerate the development of research integrity screening tools, and really to allow us to deploy those tools, to allow us as an industry to deploy these tools at scale, by really making it easier for publishers of all sorts and shapes and sizes to just plug in and start using them. So as an infrastructure, there are three key design principles that really lie at the heart of the hub. First, the hub allows for pooling of content, data, signals, and intelligence, which allows us to really look for patterns across journals and publishers, which is something that no publisher can do alone. We, of course, do that in a way that is safe and respects confidentiality. So while the content from different publishers is made accessible to common tools, publishers will not be able to see each other's material. The second design criterion is around flexibility and the ability to adapt. The hub is meant to harbor many different sorts of tools and applications dealing with all sorts of research integrity breaches. And these applications will benefit from common metadata, common interoperability standards, which means that it becomes easier and quicker to develop and also continuously improve such tools. And we anticipate that that level of agility will be direly needed, as paper mills will also no doubt adapt to tightened screening. And so we need to be agile and be able to continuously improve and up our game. The third point I wanted to make now is that the information flowing out of the hub is always meant to be an indication of potential issues. I think the speakers before me also underlined that well. It will always still need to be assessed by editors or research integrity staff, and the hub will never just by itself autonomously make a decision to reject a paper. So I hope the screens that I'm about to show you bring these principles across, and even though they're intentionally very early results, that they inspire you to think about what the hub could do for you in the future. So without further ado, here is the first screen that I wanted to show. And this is the interface for publisher A, one of two publishers that we have set up for this demonstrator. And you see that that interface has several tabs, which corresponds to the different tools that are accessible through the hub. And in this demo, I will focus on two tools, paper mills and simultaneous submissions. The second thing that I wanted to underline is that you will see today is a very manual data entry process. And that is, of course, only for demonstration purposes. The system is built around APIs, which we will be integrating with editorial systems so that all of this will happen completely automatically in the background. So moving on to the specifics of the paper mill screening, the hub allows participating publishers to upload articles which they suspect are generated by paper mills. And that creates a corpus. And that corpus we use to cross-reference newly submitted manuscripts and to identify signals and patterns that might point to a paper mill origin. For the purpose of this demo, I will not be adding those articles now, but we have preloaded the system with retracted articles of suspected paper mill origin from a number of publishers, as well as with certain string patterns that are found to be indicative of a paper mill origin. So let me show you how the screening step works. And recall that I'm logged in as publisher A, one of the publishers who has access to the hub, and I'll enter article metadata for a manuscript that's just been submitted and that I want to screen. And again, this is now manual entry, which will be replaced with integrations with editorial systems in the future. After adding the metadata, I click on the screen button. I am informed that now there is an application that is triggered and that will analyze the article metadata. And then if we wait a bit, here's the result. And you see that there is this orange exclamation mark, which informs me that the manuscript has similarities with known paper mill suspects. And again, this is not a hard yes or no decision, but it alerts the editors or the research integrity staff that further analysis may be appropriate in this case. Publishing staff will also receive an email to the extent to alert them that the screening has been completed. And this is an example of that type of email. So the second use case that I wanted to show today is around simultaneous submissions. Manuscripts are submitted to several journals at the same time. It's also been discussed in quite some detail by the previous speaker. It's a problem in itself because it really clogs the peer review system. But again, we've also learned that it's often an indication of paper mills at work. Also, simultaneous submissions, I think, is of interest because it's really a prime example of how publishers need to collaborate to tackle an issue by really looking over the fence of individual journals and the content submitted to them. So I'll start again with publisher A, entering metadata for an article that has just entered the editorial process. And of course, we're using fictitious journal names and manuscript titles here. So after clicking the submit button, the information is sent to the relevant tool within the hub for processing. And wait a bit, and then the result comes back, and we see that the check has completed, and we see this green tick icon, which indicates that there are no similar manuscripts known to the hub at this time, which is as we would expect because we started from a fresh environment. Now switching to publisher B, who have their own completely separated environment connected to the hub. Again, we enter metadata for a fictional manuscript, which is titled that's very similar to the one you just saw. We go through the process again, we hit submit, then briefly pause for a bit before the results come back. And now after the analysis has been completed, we again see this orange exclamation mark, which indicates that there is a similar manuscript under review elsewhere at this time. And again, just as with the paper mails example, the signal is meant to alert editors or research integrity staff to look into the case more closely. So that concludes the screens that I wanted to show and the user journeys that I wanted to show today. And again, it's a very first demonstrator, but I do hope that it has provided you with some color as to these core design principles that I mentioned at the beginning and how we are implementing those and how we are planning to develop that further. So to recap, first you have seen how the hub offers different interfaces for different publishers, allowing them to safely pool content to look for research integrity issues that transcend the level of individual journals. Secondly, you have seen how the hub is flexible infrastructure that allows us and you as a publishing community to develop and make available a wide set of screening tools. And thirdly, you have seen how the hub can fulfill a role to inform the editorial decision-making process, but will never have the final say. So what's next? This is our roadmap at the high level for the remainder of the year. We're working on the integration with editorial systems. We're extending the capabilities of the hub to have the ability to ingest also abstracts and full text. Of course, we're working hard to include additional signals that we're learning from some of you in the room today in the community at large. And we're integrating with third-party tools. We have no desire to develop our own specific tools for everything when there are perfectly adequate tools available on the market. And of course, throughout the program, we are very mindful that these are not just technological challenges, but that technological advancements will really need to go hand in hand with the development of policy and legal frameworks. And we really try to address that collectively within the program of the STM Integrity Hub. Thank you very much. That concludes the demo. And then I'd like to hand back to Joris where some Q&A and the panel discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Hilke. There's quite some questions, so I want to start with some questions from the audience, and then we will go to the panel discussion. First question I see is the pooling of content for submissions accepted or published articles, please?
Well, it can be at various levels. Again, the hub is an infrastructure, so different types of integrity issues, different use cases may have different requirements. I would expect that the greatest benefit will lie in screening at the moment of submissions, because that is the moment that you can filter before the gate and not filter after something, and not discover issues after they have been published. So we imagine the greatest utility would be at really screening at the moment a manuscript is submitted.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to ask a question or comment, just speak out. It can be via the chat, but it can also be live. Another question, do you get information about which other journal is reviewing a submitted manuscript? Does the hub notify editors of journals that may be reviewing the same manuscript?
Yeah, that's a great choice. Or that's a great question. We're actually discussing and debating this. It's really an editorial policy question, I think. Maybe Katrina or one of the colleagues from Elsevier would like to weigh in as well. My understanding is in the Elsevier pilot, they have indeed made the decision to inform both, inform editors of both of the journals. That's very well a direction that we could go into with the hub as well, but we haven't fully settled that. We want to take a bit of time to really think through the consequences of that decision at the editorial policy level. But from a technology perspective, that is very well possible.
Yeah, got it. It's very simple, but of course it's the same within the same company, so it's a little bit maybe less complicated in various terms, also GDPR wise and so on. Is that we basically the system sends an email to the two editors, they both get it at the same time. with, it doesn't send them the full text of the article, it sends them the title and the abstract. And then if based on that, they can decide if they then are comfortable comparing full text submissions if they need to. But yeah, it's emailing all. We had one case where it was five same papers submitted, just 5 journals on the same day, and it was 5 editors. So yeah. But you do need to think about things like GDPR and so on. You know, it's within one company, there's a little bit, some of these questions are a bit simpler.
Yeah.
Good. 2 more questions, and then we go to the panel discussion. The business model for the platform, a question from somebody. Hilke, could you perhaps respond?
Yeah, I can respond to that. And Joris, I know you have a few thoughts about that as well, so feel free to add to my response. We're still developing that, is the short answer. We're taking this year to really work through what the hub should be and how it can add most value and what it really should be focusing on. The intention is in 2023 to launch the MVP, and then at that point in time also have a business model. I would imagine, though, at the end of the day, that the organizations that utilize the hub the most will also be paying a fee to use that at some point in time. We do want the system to become self-sustainable in the long run, and we're not. That's also one of the principles behind STM solutions. We're not there to make a big profit, but we do want our services to be self-sustainable.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so I'm the moderator of this session, but also the product director of the platform. So let me also answer some questions. I see here a question from Phil. How do you intend to get unpublished manuscript into the database? I'm not sure if you mean submitted, so not yet published manuscripts. That is, of course, crucial. That is something we're going to build this year as well. So the idea is to have this fully integrated with the submission systems, and that's actually a next step for the development. So basically, it will be an automatic feed, of course, fully controlled by the publisher, and that's another very important principle of the hub. The publisher is in full control, so the publisher will decide which content is shared, but also which screening tools will be used. So, but in the end, it will be fully integrated. So basically, the content is submitted to the hub, and the signals are sent back to the submission system. So the editor will then make a decision on the signal, and then he or she will be able to follow up on that. And maybe also to follow up on another question is, will there be room for the specific signals that are detected to be sent? Yes, we will do that. And again, the very important principle of the hub is that it's the editor that makes a decision. So it's a smart solution for creative individuals, as we tend to say. So basically, we provide the information, we provide the signals, but it's for the editor in the end to follow up and to make a decision. So also we will be as comprehensive as possible to tell the editor what kind of signals we have detected. All right, a lot of questions, and maybe if I can ask the panel also to check the questions in the chat and answer these. But I would like to answer, I want to follow up with the panel discussion. I would like the presenters, including Chris, to open the cameras, and I have a question for them. One element, one focus of the Integrity Hub is to pool content. And my question to the publishers that presented before is, how do you think the pooling of content, what has the greatest advantage? I'm thinking, for example, is it building training sets, which is another thing we intend to do by pooling content, or is it, for example, by capturing duplicate submissions? Where do you think the pooling element of the hub will add the biggest advantages? Maybe I give the word to Chris first.
Okay, thank you. Some things are simply better together. Let's get cheesy about this, but they really are. One of the things that's better together is a sort of immune response to a new concern. So I think another thing to the ideas that you suggested that I think is a major advantage of pooling is that when a signal is seen in one place, that signal is transferred and made available to others, and they can avoid the same concerns too. And that is something that you can only do when you do it together. So That's what I'd say is an advantage of pooling.
Anyone wants to comment on that?
I mean, just to say that I agree absolutely. I think that, you know, this particular problem, if we all reject, you know, all of these paper mill papers, then they all just end up in each other's work queues. You know, there's a clear, you know, mutual advantage in working together on this problem.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Really, it's about what I think you sort of mentioned two things there, Joris. I think both of them are really important. So the duplicate submission element is really important. You know, we can't see what's going on in submissions to other publishers. So if we can do that in a way that's, you know, safe and respects confidentiality, but still allows us to detect this happening, you know, that's a huge leap forward. And then, yeah, in terms of providing a corpus for, you know, this sort of data training set for tools to build upon, I think longer term, you know, that's potentially, you know, going to really help us improve the tools that we have or develop new tools that will you know, continue to support us in detecting these problems.
Good, thank you. One question, actually two might be related to each other, so maybe ask Hilke to comment it. Does the duplicate submission check only happen at the point someone clicks submit for a given article, or does it rescan throughout the time the article remains under review? And another question is, how long will the manuscripts be stored in the hub?
Yeah, great set of questions, and indeed very well combined. So the model that we have in mind now is that the process is triggered whenever action is taken, in this case manual, but in the future by integration with the editorial system. So whenever a new manuscript flows into the hub, specifically for the use case of simultaneous submissions, that will then, so that newly submitted manuscript will be scanned against the existing corpus of all manuscripts that are under submission within the scope of journals connected to the hub. And then after the screening, that newly submitted manuscript will also become part of that reference corpus. So it will continue to be used to cross-correlate and check against similarities of newly submitted manuscripts. And then for the use case of simultaneous submissions, it will again go out of that corpus as soon as the article has been either rejected or accepted, because then it's no longer under review and it's sort of out of that area of potential research integrity issues.
Good, excellent. And then maybe one more question is, will integration to submission systems other than ScholarOne in EM be possible? For example, custom-built systems.
Yeah, great question. I responded to that in the chat. So yes, that's very much our intention by developing APIs that editorial systems can connect with. Of course, just in terms of efficiency and scalability, it's not going to be possible for us to develop bespoke integrations to, you know, the wide variety of sometimes home developed editorial systems out there. So I think standardizing on APIs would be the logical way forward. I would imagine the APIs themselves are open. We do want to make sure that it's really the publisher that's always in the driving seat, and they get to say which tools may access their content for screening and which ones they may not. That also underlies our strategy of connecting with third-party systems. So technically, we want the hub to be able to also be sort of a conduit towards existing third-party tools, but it's always the editor who gets to say which tools they would want to enable for their manuscripts.
Yeah. Thank you. Going back to the publishers, I think what we saw from the presentations is there are quite unknowns. The paper mill companies are secretive by design, of course, and there are new problems that arise. Asking each of the publishers, what is the big unknown for you? What are really the things that we don't know, and possibly the collaboration, the Integrity Hub could help us with solving? Maybe give the word to Katrina first.
Sorry, Joris, can you just repeat? I was about to answer someone's question in the chat.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
Sorry.
The question is, what are for you the big unknowns? What are the things you really are not known yet for you and you would like to investigate, and possibly the hub could help you with?
Yeah, I think for me, the big unknown is, and I was thinking about it, it actually relates a bit to Kave's question about images, is what are the things that as soon as we start detecting them, they're very easy, what are the things that are very easy for the paper mills to pivot, that as soon as they know we can find it, they just can really easily change it. Like, for example, one of my concerns about using the titles, this like predictable microRNA, blah, blah, blah kind of template, is that's a very easy thing to change, right? As soon as you realize that journals are looking for it, you just start using more creative titles, right? So that's for me, like, what are the things we can find that are hard for them to pivot? And I think for me, Kaveh was asking about images. And for me, images are really important in the sense that it's super easy for someone to go off and write a whole paper based on research that never happened from scratch, right? But it's even harder to generate images. And generally the images are taken from somewhere. I know there are also some that we think are fully synthetic images, but in general, the images are copied from somewhere, right? So hopefully that's one of the things that's harder for them to pivot. And that's a bit my concern, is like, how easy and hard is it for them? Having said that, there are things like, blatant plagiarism that we've been able to detect structurally for 10 years now, and people still do it, still happens, right? So you'll still catch people, but these groups some of them are very sophisticated, and innovative, unfortunately. They're innovating as fast as we are.
Yeah. Anyone wants to comment on this?
Only just to say you just articulated much better than I could the point I wanted to make, which is that the paper mills are evolving all the time, and so how do we know we're keeping up? And I think Katrina's just made a really excellent point that it's actually trying to find the things that they can't easily evolve and change, and trying to detect those. It would be a real bonus. So yeah, that would be great.
Adam, maybe going back to you, because you have done a lot of analysis at Sage. What are unknowns for you, and what are things that you really would like to investigate further?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've often said about this that we often are in this situation where we don't know what we don't know. And I think for me, the way I think about it is, it's like there's possibly an ideal kind of pipeline of analysis to identify paper mills and minimize the amount of stuff that a human might need to look at to do any kind of investigation. And I think first of all, the big problem I have is just figuring out what is that pipeline, because there's still a lot of things that I need to understand before I would know what I would want to build. But then the second one is, I think once it's well understood what is a good pipeline, or what pipelines are useful, then it's about building those, and I think people collaborating to build those so that the analysis can be done as easily as possible. That's really what it's about for me, and that's where I see potentially the hub might be able to help there, right?
Yeah, thanks. Anyone wants to comment on that?
I have one more unknown to offer that I'm really eager to start exploring as soon as we can, and that is really the integration, the human factors into integrating this into the end-to-end process.
Which is an unknown about how many signals we're going to get, and then what we're going to do when we get those signals, and the resources we're going to use to do something with those signals. And that's something that keeps me up at night, really, when we start looking what we're going to do with what we find. So that's an unknown.
Do you refer to the editorial policies that we have to build? And maybe that's
yeah. You use the word policy. I mean, policy is fine, but you got to have resources to do something with a policy, right? And that's the bit that scares me. So yeah, roughly speaking, policies, but actually more about people.
Hilke, you were starting to say something too.
Yeah, there was a bit of a delay in Chris's response to me, which is why I was speaking at the same time. Apologies. So one other unknown for me that I'm really eager to start exploring is sort of the human factors in really integrating this into the process. I'm convinced we can make this work. I mean, it's going to be challenging at points, no doubt, to do the full technical integration, but no doubt we can get that to work. So how do we really make sure that we give the right signal at the right moment to the editor and the research integrity officer to really be able to act on that, giving them the information that they need, giving them all of the the fidelity that they're required to make a decision, without having that risk of sort of this becoming computer says no by proxy, where whenever they see an orange tick, they will just reject the manuscript, even though that's not needed. So how do we balance giving the right information at the right moment in the workflow to really make an informed decision?
Yeah, good point. We have a great question from Kim Eggleton, and maybe for all of us to answer. What can we do to support this hub? I'm conscious how fast these companies can pivot, and as such, I feel the time is of the essence. Curious to hear your thoughts about that. Maybe Hilke, you want to start? You look.
Well, I could start, and Kim, keep doing what you're doing. You were one of the participants in a workshop that we had last week around paper mills, where we shared what we know about pattern signals that could be used, and the hub can bring that to scale. I think that's definitely something we want to continue to do. So keep pooling not only the resources and the data and the technology, but also the insights and the intelligence that we have. I think that is super helpful, and we should keep on doing that.
Anyone else has some thoughts about that question?
I might just be repeating what I said in my presentation, but I do think that, you know, if we have a very solid test for duplicate full text, that's just very, very hard to work around. You know, if someone wants to get a paper into, you know, 2 or 3 different publishers at once, and we're checking the full text to see if it's a duplicate, for somebody to find a way to work around that is basically impossible. And that's why I think it's a really promising detection method, because it's so simple to do. And there's a huge amount of other stuff, but this one is easy, and it's clear that it's got potential.
Yeah, and Adam, I loved your overview of the let's say the evidence elements and the suspicion or the circumstantial evidence that you gave. I think that is a great thing for us to work with, and to focus on the most important elements. I have one more general question before I have a specific question that I would like to ask each one of you. And the more general question is that we are now with the hub, of course, we're doing very important work in screening and making sure that submitted content doesn't enter the scholarly record. But of course, it's a broader problem, and think about going upstream, think about other participants in the ecosystem. So think about funders, think about governments. What else can we do as a industry to stop this development, and to make sure indeed the increase of problematic information being submitted? Any thoughts on what else we should do besides activities in the hub? Nicola, maybe to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, ideally we would be able to try and, you know, tackle this at source and effectively shut down the paper mills, but that's certainly no mean feat. But again, is something that will benefit from publisher collaboration. So whether we can work together through organizations like STM to influence, you know, for example, funding bodies or you know, scientific academies in different regions to really start to tackle these activities at source. I mean, certainly on our own, as the Royal Society of Chemistry, there's a limit to what we can achieve in terms of influencing, you know, government funding in China or wherever it may be. And so by working together, I think we can just amplify each other's voices. And when we're thinking about you know, influencing in other regions of the world, you know, if we're thinking about China as an example, you know, we need to understand, you know, who it is we need to influence and how to go about that in the right way that's, you know, culturally sensitive and is going to be received in the right way, that, you know, that without you know, I can't think of the right phrase, but, you know, we need to be sensitive about how we approach it, essentially. And yeah, much like with the collaboration hub, I think collaboration in that element is going to be really important as well.
Thank you. Anyone wants to comment on this?
I think similar to what Nicola was saying, I mean, the underlying, like, where's the market coming from, right? I think in a way that's the underlying question you have to really be looking at, because I read this article, I think it was the New York Times, it's a really interesting article about, you know, these hubs, call centers who call you and try to scam you and give away your credit card details and that kind of stuff. And they scam people out of billions, you know, and I read this whole thing about the police and how difficult it was for the police to investigate them, or how little will there was for the police. So this was billions of people losing billions, you know, and yet the police ability to actually go in and shut them down was absolute outright fraud. And how difficult that was, and how little was actually done. And I thought, wow, if you're looking to go down that sort of legal route with these paper mills where it's less of a clear fraud case, it'd be really difficult. So I think you really have to look at, like, where's the market coming from? And then how are institutes and governments measuring? Like, that's what it boils down to, right? It's a sort of management approach to science, measure people's output, put people in boxes of how many papers they published, how many citations they had. And I know sometimes people think, oh, well, publishers are part of this whole thing. And, you know, it suits publishers to have people measured on papers. If you look at, like, the amount of resource and time and money that goes into publishers dealing with all of the ethical issues that are generated by this race to publish, and the fact that, you know, most of the time publishers are only making money from the papers we publish, not all the ones we reject. I would say that actually it's very much publishers' interest not to have this race to just publish volume and have people measured just on volume. So I think that's it. We have to sort of get with, like, remove the market demand for it, right? That's what we need to try and focus on, which I know is easier said than done, but I don't feel. I think it's like whack-a-mole. If we start getting even all the lawyers in the world and try and get them to try and shut these paper mills down, another one will just appear the following day. That's my concern.
One of the things I think the hub might help us to do is to be better at sizing the problem and collecting data, to have good conversations with, you know, leaders of institutions and regulatory bodies in countries or states around the world. At the moment, it's very hard to say the problem is this and is this big, because you know, the data's fragmented, unclear, and so on. Maybe that'll be a thing that the hub helps us to do as well.
Yeah, good point.
I think we also have to be very careful, by the way, about connecting this with specific regions or countries, because I actually don't think that helps to solving the problem. What it does is it allows other countries to be complacent and go, oh, this is a such and such problem. This is not a problem for me, right? And if you look at the actual data, a lot of the time, like, it doesn't actually bear up in terms of you compare volume from countries and ethical issues. There's assumptions made about certain regions that actually the data doesn't really support, and it's lazy. I don't think it's helpful either, because it may just allow other people to get away with things. There's an assumption, oh, you're from this country, then it's probably okay, you know, or do extra checking on certain countries doesn't make sense to me. Really it has to be data driven, right? And not.
I think this ties into comments from Katrina, indeed, that we need independent research to analyze the data. I think it's a good point. We need evidence, we need more data, we need more analysis. And indeed, one of the things we aim to do with the hub is also make it easier for third parties to analyze the content and help us sizing the problem and seeing how we can best solve it. Thank you very much for all the questions. I have one last question to all the publishers, and that is, if there's one thing you could choose the hub would be able to support you with tomorrow, what would that be? And your short answers, please. Can I start with Katrina?
Duplicated images between different papers. Sorry, I'm thinking the other everyone else's first.
Stole my answer.
Sorry, I was lucky I was asked.
Images. Well, luckily we have a working group working on images, so that's good news. Although it's a hard problem to tackle. Chris, do you agree, or do you have another priority?
I think the priority for the hub for tomorrow is not a technical solution. It's getting the infrastructure set up. And that's a sort of dodging the question, I suppose. But if we don't have the infrastructure per the plans, we can't do it. We can't use the image screening tool. We can't create new tools. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Adam?
Well, I suppose I already did give my answer in terms of me being very positive about the duplicate submissions checks. I guess leaving that aside, though, you know, what Chris mentioned about being able to better quantify the problem. You know, people always talk about seeing the tip of the iceberg when they talk about paper mills and misconduct generally. I think, well, it'd be nice to really make sure we're looking at the iceberg, right? The whole thing. I mean, that seems like that's an important starting point before we do lots of pieces of analysis.
Yeah, good point. Well, we came to the end of the webinar. I want to thank all the presenters today. I think you gave a really good overview of, indeed, the seriousness of the problem, the complexity of the problem, and how collaboration is essential in solving this. Also, thank you very much, Chris, for moderating the first session. Thank you for Hilke for doing the demo. As said, this is the first milestone, the first glimpse of the infrastructure. We'll be working very hard with all the participants in the next phases. So stay tuned for updates. We will present you the developments and the further integrations. And of course, it's an ongoing discussion. It is to an extent an arms race, so we will continue to develop and interact with each other to make sure we can really tackle this serious problem, really eroding the trust of science. So thanks again, and hope to see you next time.